New Zealand. Last century, on the 8th day of May, both Great Britain and the United States of America celebrated the end of the war in Europe. On that day, they celebrated with the streets filled with flags and banners, rejoicing the defeat of the Nazi war machine, which had rained down terror on the countries, cities and population of Europe. Now, on that day, it was a day of celebration, a day of long held out hope that this time would come when they could contemplate a restart for their lives and return to normal. But as the servicemen returned to their homes, the world was anything but normal. As they rebuilt their lives and cities, the family life, there was a constant. What they had left had become reset into what had become their new normal. Now fast forward to the 21st century of today. The New Zealand government in 2020 announced it was putting this nation on a war footing in its efforts to wipe out coronavirus. That response was the introduction of legislation bringing in the COVID-19 Public Health Response Act 2020. Now this act allowed the government freedom of power to introduce sweeping changes which seen the country locked down, borders closed and freedoms limited. Under this legislation, and as the pandemic continued, this government has become drunk with power. More change was foisted on the nation. Citizens faced more restrictions with more losses of freedom regarding travel. It sounded and looked like the nation was at war. Closed borders left many stranded, while many families were emotionally ripped apart. If you did make it through the border, you were under house arrest in MIQ, under guard by both police and armed forces. Documentation was required unless you were a gang member to enter or exit the city of Auckland. You know, a true leader will have the power and will know how to use it for good. But our current leadership has overstepped its mandate and used it in a way that no one in this country would ever imagine. It's well documented our Prime Minister laughed, saying it is what it is, when she introduced the system of apartheid, which is abhorred by the world. A system designed to exclude one section of society against another because they exercise their freedom of choice. It's coerced its population to undertake what is still regarded by the manufacturer as being in the trial stage of a mass medical procedure. It punishes workers who opted not to take the vaccine and they lost their jobs and their careers. The silencing of the media to ensure their narrative is heard. They've denied families access to one another at crucial times or for celebrations. They've denied the freedoms to travel to visit whom we like. The loss of access to education, church, sporting events and friends, and can I add into that, playgrounds for the kids. We were even limited on the amount of people that we could associate with. And when we were encouraged to pee in the bushes of our friends because we weren't allowed to access the toilet during the summer barbecue. They silenced their critics with incarceration. Their denial of human rights for passport holders who want to come home. The list, is endless. But I want to add one more before I move on. This government has used fear to gain control of the population, to manipulate us to keep them in power so that they could hold authority over us. The use of fear and everything else listed is one thing we can possibly take, but it's a straight-out deception, the spin, the broken promises and the lies that have emanated from the so-called pulpit of truth. I think that's irked New Zealanders more than anything else. It was our Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern who stood on that pulpit claiming the government was the single source of truth. This was the same politician who, on winning in a landslide victory in the last election, said her government would represent all New Zealanders. This is the same politician who took an oath of office to care for all members of society and yet refuses to listen to the concerns expressed by groups opposed to the vaccine mandates. With hindsight, we can see how she and the ministers of the Crown, how her health officials, how government-paid modellers and scientists, how the government-paid media have all misled the nation. This must stop. Like the families who celebrated VE Day, New Zealanders are looking and wanting an end to this madness. The COVID-19 Public Health Response Act 2020 was put in place with a twilight clause of 2 years, which should mean it end in May this year. But a provision was made if the pandemic was not under control, then the government could seek an extension every 90 days. As the rest of the world looks to bring it to an end, there's no sign of the Ardern-led government looking to follow suit. Instead, its response to Omicron indicates it's looking to tighten their grip even more. Don't believe me? Just look at the border restrictions which are already in place for later this year. My friends, they are drunk on power. This pandemic is internationally fast running out of steam, but here in New Zealand we have a continuation of the fear strategy in order to continue to disrupt the lives of this nation. Many point to the proposed worldwide Great Reset, which our current government has foolishly denied it's a part of. But spoiler alert, it's already started. As it did at the end of World War II, we're about to see it happen in our country. You know, they call it the new normal. It's already happening. Think about how often you use this term. It's happening. Having been through the war, many in Britain were affected by what they had seen and been a part of and did. Financially, psychologically and culturally, there was no way this nation could return to the way it was, as it had to set a path to rebuild. When this pandemic is over, New Zealanders will have to rebuild our nation. But think ahead. What will this nation be like? You know, we've become attuned to fear. We've become attuned to division. We've become used to cowering behind a mask of deception. But worst of all, we as a nation have become used to distrusting our fellow countrymen. We will find our nation a far, far different place to what it was in the summer of 2020. Our nation will face shortages causing deprivation and hardship caused by a government which is out of control, drunk with power and clutching a fistful of cash. The only problem with that is it's not our cash they're spending. And they're not spending it on things like infrastructure. It was for a temporary fix, but it belongs to someone else and it has to be repaid. It must stop. My friends, many times Jesus warned his followers to stay awake and discern the times that they were living in. Many times he has told his followers to just wake up. Our nation is under siege. We as a nation need to wake up and stay awake and demand an end to what is happening. You know, when you stop looking at the world with fear, you'll be open, your eyes will be open, and you'll see with fresh eyes and be amazed that what you thought was right is actually wrong. It is sad to say that we are reaping today what we sowed. We believed their lies and allowed them to take control and manipulate us. It's now too late. But they're the ones in control, but heed the warning. We are here today because we accepted, we didn't question. But is it too late? The answer is no. We as a nation need to push back. We need to join with those New Zealanders to push back this tidal wave of inevitability. But what can we do about it? We can learn from the likes of Charlotte Bellis and others who have made some noise. We can join the rising choir of voices who oppose the mandates. You know, they're not mad anti-vaxxers, they're just like you and I. And they want to see an end to this madness. But you know, here's a word of warning to this growing voice. The message must be united, and you must all sing from the same sheet. You know, the Trump flags, anti-1080 signs and other single crusades must all come under the one banner, and that is the fight for and the return to the freedoms of New Zealand. The Great Reset train is happening, and it's coming to a neighbourhood near you, just like it did in Europe after the war, and it will happen right here in New Zealand. What we are experiencing is just the start as the clouds of evil gather and the ride of the horsemen of the apocalypse is closer than you think. Unless we are prepared to accept our nation is under siege from evil forces and our only hope is in the return of Jesus Christ, then we can sing God Defend New Zealand until the cows come home. We need a great awakening amongst the citizens of this nation. Then we need to stay awake. We must push back against this evil we see controlling our country for the sake of this nation, our community, our neighbours, our family, and most of all, ourselves. We have seen things over the last 18 months change in the blink of an eye. So today is a day to get closer to God. Read the Bible to understand the time that we are living in and the reasons it's happening. My friends, find yourself a Bible-believing church. Let Jesus become your Saviour and get to know him. And then look up, for this is where your salvation comes from. It's nearer than you think.
Thank you for watching. Help us to spread this message by sharing it within your own network. If you want to see more messages like this one, simply hit the subscribe button. For more information about our work, or if you're moved to donate the price of a cup of coffee, jump online to our website, christianvoicenewzealand.com.